When the HOA president called the cops on me over a fence, I didn't panic, I smiled. Because the officers she summoned weren't cops at all. They were my private property security team. And when they pulled out the paperwork, her entire empire of fake authority crumbled right there in front of the neighborhood. It all started 3 months after I inherited my grandfather's house in Maplewood Estates. Picture perfect suburbia. Every lawn trimmed to the exact same height, every mailbox precisely 12 inches from the curb, every house painted in the same lifeless shade of beige. I used to joke that the place looked like it had been copy-pasted by a city planner with OCD. I didn't mind the order, not at first, but then she showed up. Karen White, the self-proclaimed Queen of Maplewood, wrapped in her bathrobe like suburban royalty. One morning, she stormed across my property line with a measuring tape in hand, scowling like she'd caught me committing a felony. 6'2", she barked, snapping the tape back. Maximum allowed height is 6 feet. That's a $500 fine. I set my coffee cup on the fence post and said calmly, "Ma'am, I'm Jake Wilson. I don't think we've been properly introduced." "I don't care who you are," she shot back, jabbing the tape toward my chest. "You will comply with HOA standards." Her voice carried across the street and suddenly blinds started shifting in windows. Neighbors were peeking out, whispering. Some looked sympathetic, most looked terrified. You could tell they'd seen this show before. "Can you show me the specific legal authority that gives you jurisdiction over this property?" I asked. I pulled out my phone, recording her. That short-circuited something in her brain. She sputtered, "Legal authority. I've been running this neighborhood for 3 years. That's all the authority I need." Her hand shook slightly. She was trying to project dominance, but I saw right through it, the tan line where a wedding ring used to be the twitch at the corner of her eye. A woman, barely holding her world together, clinging to power in the only place she could still control. I smiled. "Well, Mrs. White, I did some research, and this property's legal history is fascinating." "I don't care about your research," she barked. "You'll pay the fine or I'll make sure you regret it." Then she threw the metal tape on the ground, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the street. That's when I knew what I was dealing with, a dictator in a bathrobe. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police," she hissed. I leaned on the fence. "Please go ahead, let's make it official." And she did. She called 911, claiming I was a hostile resident threatening property values. The dispatcher must have been rolling their eyes, but she kept going, her voice trembling with self-righteous fury. When she hung up, she smirked. "Now we'll see who has authority here." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Perfect," I said. "I've been hoping to have a chat about property jurisdiction." She didn't realize that the call she'd made was about to expose her entire house of cards. 15 minutes later, 2 black SUVs rolled up. Not the local police cruisers she expected, these were sleek, unmarked vehicles. The men who stepped out wore crisp field gear with subtle badges. Hartwell Property Services. Karen didn't even notice. "Officers," she exclaimed, rushing to meet them. "This man is violating HOA regulations and refusing to pay his fines." The taller one looked at me. "Are you the property owner, sir?" "I am," I said. "Inherited it from my grandfather, Harold Wilson." Karen cut in. "He thinks he's above community standards. Arrest him." The men exchanged a glance. One of them crouched by the fence using a laser rangefinder far more sophisticated than a tape measure. "Ma'am," the lead said evenly, "we'll need to review all relevant documentation before making any determinations about jurisdiction." "Documentation," Karen snapped. "I am the documentation." But the words didn't land. The men were already looking past her toward my house. "Mr. Wilson," the lead said, "may we see the property deed?" Of course. Inside, I handed them my grandfather's original 1960 deed-aged paper golden seal, the kind of document that ends arguments before they start. Karen hovered behind us, her confidence draining by the second. "These records," the man said quietly, "show that your family owns not just this lot, but the entire underlying tract. Mineral rights, subsurface development authority, the works." Karen blinked. "That's impossible. The HOA's been here for years." "Since 1998, right?" the other man asked. "Did the developer secure consent from the original landowner?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. "The developer handled it. she said weakly. I could feel the shift. The neighbors outside were gathering again, whispering. Even her loyal board members were glancing nervously at each other. But later that week, Karen doubled down. She called for a community meeting in the local center, packed the room with her supporters, and plastered the walls with posters about protecting property values. She started her speech like she was running for president. "Order protects prosperity," she declared, clicking through slides of perfectly manicured lawns. Without rules, we descend into chaos. The irony was almost painful. I sat near the back watching the two officers take notes. They weren't cops, they were legal consultants documenting every word. Karen pointed at me mid-sentence. "Jake Wilson represents everything wrong with our society. Individual entitlement over community responsibility. He thinks his grandfather's paperwork makes him special, and that's the moment I faltered. Sitting there surrounded by hostile stares, I wondered if I was the problem. Maybe I was just another stubborn homeowner too proud to fit in. Maybe Grandpa's old land didn't matter anymore. Maybe order was better than freedom. For a second, I thought about selling the place, just leaving it all behind. But then I remembered the nights Grandpa spent on that porch telling me control built on fear isn't order, Jake. It's decay wearing a suit. That's when the fire came back. When Karen called for a vote to expel me from the neighborhood, the taller consultant stood. Before we proceed, he said calmly, "There's something everyone should understand." The room fell silent. "We're not police officers. We're property rights consultants from Hartwell Services." You could have heard a pin drop. Karen froze her hand still on the microphone. You're not cops?" she stammered. "No, ma'am," the man replied. "You called 911 for a civil matter. When we arrived, you assumed our identity without asking for identification." Her face turned the color of chalk. The microphone slipped from her hand, screeching with feedback as it hit the floor. He continued laying out the documents on the table. The 1998 HOA formation packet never included consent from the landholder, which means every fine, every enforcement action, every restriction since then was done without legal authority. Neighbors gasped. One woman stood up. "You mean all those fines were illegal?" "Every single one." Karen tried to grab the mic again. "You tricked me. This is fraud." The man's tone stayed even. "We didn't trick anyone. You assumed power that was never yours." From there it unraveled fast. People started shouting stories about being fined for rose gardens, wheelchair ramps, solar panels. Years of resentment poured out like floodwater breaking a dam. Her loyal board members backed away, eyes wide. When the real police finally showed up, summoned by Karen's frantic last-ditch call, they reviewed the situation and shrugged. "This is a civil dispute, ma'am. Mr. Wilson's documentation is valid." That was it. Her reign was over. Later that evening, I found her sitting on the steps outside her so-called HOA office, just a spare room in her house, now boxed up and empty. She was crying quietly, papers scattered around her feet. Divorce documents, bank statements, the fragments of a life built on control. "I was protecting this community," she said. "I just wanted to keep it safe." I sat beside her. "There's a difference between protection and possession, Karen." For the first time, she didn't argue. Within days, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the HOA. Hartwell filed the paperwork. The banners came down, the compliance patrol stopped, and the fine ledger $37,000 worth of intimidation was shredded. But I didn't stick around for the celebration. I stood at the fence, coffee in hand, staring at the measuring tape still lying in the dirt where she'd thrown it that first day. The symbol of her authority, now rusting under my morning sun. Neighbors passed by smiling for the first time in years. A few nodded at me. They didn't need to say it, we all understood what had just happened. One person's need for control had poisoned an entire community. And it only took a single question: what gives you the right to break the spell? Karen eventually moved out. The house sold quietly, no announcement, no farewell. A few weeks later, a new family moved in, kids playing in the yard, laughter echoing across the same fence she'd once tried to tear down. I looked at that fence and realized it had stood through everything. Her threats, her rules, her collapse. The same way my grandfather had built it, sturdy, honest, and just high enough to keep the noise out but let the light in. That's when I finally exhaled. The neighborhood wasn't perfect anymore, but for the first time it felt real. Because control doesn't create peace, respect does.